Hey there, second grade. Today I want to teach you how to use oil pastels. So after I had my artwork completed and I drew all of my lines and I did not color in any of my area, I went to get my oil pastels. And I take my oil pastels back to my table and I open them by pushing open the flaps. Sometimes it can be a little hard. And I open my oil pastels and I set them to the side between me and one other person at my table, because two people need to share one box of oil pastels. As you can see, I've already done some oil pastel here, so let me show you how to use oil pastel. First, I look at my drawing and I decide what I want to trace. And I think the next thing I need to trace is my tree, so I take one oil pastel, a green one, and I trace on top of the pencil line. And then to make it darker, I trace a second time. Or maybe even 3 times. I don't press hard because we all know that if you press hard, your oil pastel might break. An oil pastel is basically a fancy crayon. It has some oil in it. And you'll see next week when we learn how to use watercolor paints why oil pastels are important for this project. Notice I did not color in with my oil pastel. I only outline on top of my pencil. Now here's a quick little tip for you. Sorry, I'm getting some extra paper. If you notice, when I was tracing on top of my outline, I did not lay my hand or my arm on my paper. And here's why. If you lay your hand and your arm on your paper and it goes into the oil pastel, it can smear or smudge. And that's what we don't want to happen. When I'm done with this oil pastel, I put it back into my oil pastel box and I get the next color that I need. And that's how I use oil pastels. Now I'm going to teach you how to use watercolor paints. After I'm done with my oil pastels, I put them away and I make sure that I have my paint palette and my water cup, and my paintbrush. And when I use watercolor, this is what I do. I get my paintbrush a little bit wet, and I can tap it off on the side, but what I don't do is tap it really hard because that gets everyone's paper around you all wet. So I get just a little bit of water, and I mix my paint with water until there's a lot of water in my paint. Sometimes I have to get more water. See, look at that, it's getting nice and watery. And then I make sure my brush soaks up plenty of paint, and I paint. And I always hold my brush on the grip. And when my paint starts to get clear, then I get more paint. And this time I need to put a little more water. I paint every area green that's on the bush. I picked a medium-sized brush because this is a medium-sized area. But when I'm ready to paint my flower or my stems and my leaves, I'll go trade my medium-sized brush for a smaller brush. Paint every part. And when I'm ready to change colors, I rinse out my brush. This time I'm going to do the sky, so I want to get some blue. I know it looks like the blue is running out, but it's actually not. There's plenty of blue here on this side. I just have to get it wet. I'm doing my best not to let the blue get into the green. Oops, wrong blue. And I would keep going to fill in all of my blue sky. Now let me show you what not to do with watercolor paints. Here's how I don't use watercolor. I don't get a whole bunch of water and paint and make a big blob, because it doesn't look good and it will take forever to dry. That's what I don't do. Also, this is what I don't do. If I just stick my brush in the paint with no water and try and paint, it just looks really sloppy. That's what I don't do. I want to make sure that I have enough water in my paint and that I can paint nice and smooth. This is what I don't want, and this is what I don't want. This is what I want. And that is how I use watercolor paints.